Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Councillor Claire Holland. I am the London Council's Executive Member for Communities, Welfare, Empowerment and Inclusion, and I'm also the leader of the London Borough of Lambeth. I'm delighted to welcome you to this briefing, this webinar this afternoon on supporting low-income Londoners and the future of local welfare assistance schemes. Thank you very much for giving up your time to join us. Um, we know that boroughs are playing an essential role in supporting residents who are struggling with the impact of the cost of living crisis, which is also exacerbated by inflation. And in London, boroughs are distributing the Household Support Fund in innovative ways and partnering with community-based organisations to support our residents. And on top of the delivery of statutory schemes, there are numerous examples across your boroughs in London where we're developing and implementing additional support measures for our residents. Now, this event this afternoon will be focusing on one of those areas of support, and that is local welfare assistance. As we all know, anyone who works with low-income households know that even a small amount of money can make the world of difference to a household facing financial crisis. And that is why London Councils fully recognises the importance of local welfare assistance. And we have consistently called on the government to restore its dedicated funding, which was lost. In partnership with the GLA, London Councils commissioned Policy and Practice to carry out an evaluation of local welfare assistance provided by 7 London boroughs. And I'm absolutely delighted that we are joined today by Zoe Charlesworth, one of the report authors, together with her colleague Alex Clegg. And Zoe will be summarising the finding of the report and the practical recommendations for boroughs for us this afternoon. Before Zoe starts, I just wanted to draw out a couple of key points, if I may. So the report found that local welfare assistance awards have a longer term positive impact on residents' health and their financial situation. And I just want to give you a quote from one of the residents that the researcher spoke to. And this resident said this: "When you go through traumas and you go through things in life, you feel like there is literally nobody there. The people I spoke to from the council made me feel I could and that I do exist for a reason. There are good people out there who genuinely want to help. I don't feel like I have to reach rock bottom to reach out." So that's from one of the residents that participated in the research. As boroughs, we want to do more to support our residents, but we know we have to be equipped with the resources to enable us to do so. And whilst the extension of the Household Support Fund is welcome, it does something separate from the local welfare assistance schemes. The Household Support Funds acts to top up incomes of those facing shortfalls due to the cost of living crisis, while local welfare assistance is there as a safety net for those facing financial crises to prevent them from escalating further. And that's why we still need dedicated long-term funding for local welfare assistance. Having said that, many of the recommendations that Zoe will now talk us through are also applicable to your borough's household support funds, and you can consider designing them into your schemes for next year. I hope you find this presentation discussion useful. We want it to be really practical so that we can take those recommendations back to our boroughs and work out how we can improve the support for our low income residents. Now, once Zoe's done her presentation, there'll be an opportunity for questions. And we're asking you to put the questions in the chat. So it's not a normal chat, it's a question and answer chat. If you look on your screens, there's a Q&A icon at the top of the screen. And this should enable you to post your questions. And then we'll have time to go through them and to take as many questions as we possibly can. So without further ado, I would like to turn to our speaker, Zoe Charlesworth, as I said, from Policy and Practice and one of the authors of the report. And then at the end, when we're asking those questions and having a discussion, there'll also be Sam Ashton from London Councils, as well as Alex Clegg, who will be able to respond to questions and participate in the discussion. So Zoe, over to you, please.
Thank you so much, Councillor Holland. Very pleased to do this presentation, and thank you all for attending. We found this research very, very interesting ourselves, and I think it's the largest piece of research been undertaken on local welfare assistance. I hope the findings are of use to you within your councils. And as Councillor Holland said, a lot of the findings apply to any distribution of discretionary support, like Household Support Fund. Yeah, could we move to the first slide feed? So what I'm hoping to cover is a little bit of background, because of course local welfare assistance sits within the context of the cost of living crisis, the role of local authority. So we'll cover that off. Go through some of the findings. I've just pulled some of the findings out of the report. It's a long report. I'm sure you'll all receive a copy, but I just want to pull out some of the key findings and then some of the key recommendations. There are lots of recommendations and very, very specific recommendations in the reports around scheme design. And I hope they're useful to the councils that will be reading the report, but I'll just pull out some for this presentation because we've just got 20 minutes. Okay, great. So let's look at a bit of the background. I'm sure everybody here knows that local welfare assistance dedicated funding was from the financial year 2014-15 ended. And after that, it was up to councils whether they provided and funded these schemes themselves. 1 in 7 councils do not provide local welfare assistance. We believe it's lower in London, but nationally 1 in 7 don't provide local welfare assistance. And the provision by other councils, it varies enormously. Every council sets a sort of policy priorities around its local welfare assistance. They set the amount that's available for local welfare assistance. For the London boroughs that we took part in this research, that varied from 0.2 million to 3 million. And the method of assistance, how the support's delivered, whether it's through vouchers, whether it's through white goods. Typically, all of the councils had the same aim, which was to support people in emergency or crisis, but they had different limitations to who they would support. So some had capital cut-offs, some had income cut-offs, and there were within some of the policies groups that were prioritised over other groups, but generally there was an agreement that this was to help with emergency and crisis. I'll move to the next slide, please. And emergency and crisis is really interesting because if we look at the context of local welfare assistance in the whole sort of welfare landscape, emergency and crisis originally would have been around people being flooded, being burgled, things like that. But we've actually, a lot of the local welfare assistance is to top up bills and just to support people on mainstream benefits at this point with the cost of living crisis. Some work we've just done at Policy and Practice, myself and Alex, it actually was looking at the number of households who cannot meet even basic bills from means tested benefits. And it was by next April, it's going to be just over a third of households. So crisis comes in all forms. We've got the lowest real rate of benefit support that there's been for over 40 years. And the cost of living crisis has a disproportionate effect on low income households. The goods being bought, the amount of their income that goes towards food, etc. It's just slightly higher inflationary rate for those households. Absolute poverty is set to increase. It's increasing and set to increase. And food bank usage has gone up by 50% from pre-pandemic. Now, obviously, that was started with COVID, all sorts of knock-on effects. We then went on to the cost of living crisis. But we've got a landscape that's slightly different now to when a lot of these schemes were designed. Debt is huge. A lot of households, as I mentioned, we've got about a third whose benefit doesn't cover basic bills and housing costs. A lot of households are dealing with this at the moment via debt. Now, that's not sustainable. Eventually, a lot of these will fall into crisis, not be able to get further debt and not be able to meet bills or buy food. And just to complicate matters, the move to UC from legacy benefits to universal credit is happening at the same time as the cost of living crisis. And there are often gaps in support there, administrative problems or just gaps in applying for universal credit. One of the areas here is when people move over to universal credit, a lot of them don't know that they have to apply for council tax reduction, other benefit support. So you end up with a lot of debt building up on at that migratory period. I'll have a look at the next slide, please. The other area of context in which this research took place was the role of councils in supporting households. I think there's been a lot of recognition by central government of the need, the role of councils in supporting and using councils to operationalise support. We had the COVID-19 support measures, the cost of living support payments, discretionary support out to people to support the lowest, the residents who are in poverty on the lowest incomes. Alongside this, councils are obviously seeing increasing strain on their budgets, and there is a limited amount of discretionary support that councils can offer. So that's just a little bit of context, because I think it's important when we look at the reaction of local welfare assistance recipients that we understand that actually for many of them, existing on a means tested benefits cause problems in their own right, and that's why local welfare assistance was needed as almost a network underneath the benefit support network. So the project, although local welfare assistance and the role of local councils in distributing discretionary support has increased, there is very little research into the impact of local welfare assistance, not least because it's very hard to do because of the different schemes and the different way councils hold data on schemes. So London councils and the GLA wanted to create a data framework. This is basically saying to councils, this is the data you require in order to evaluate your schemes, and the report covers that. Then we use that data framework, working with 7 London boroughs, and huge thanks to those. None of this would have been possible without them. We did ask them to provide us with an awful lot of data. But we wanted to use that data framework to evidence the impact of local welfare assistance. And the findings from that fed into recommendations for service delivery and for design of discretionary support schemes. It was, as I said, it was a very large bit of research, 7 boroughs, 502 surveys to recipients, 36 hours plus of in-depth interviews. I think I ought to mention we looked at over 50 data sets to look at the data held by councils on the local welfare assistance recipients. So this was a large piece of research. So let's have a look at some of the findings. First of all, the immediate crisis that led residents to approach their council for local welfare assistance. Bills, it goes back to what I just mentioned, that local welfare assistance were initially designed for, I imagine, what we would call emergency crises, but where we are now, it is frequently being used for bills and for just day-to-day living. Money runs out before the next payment comes in, leaving people with no money for food. But other areas, housing, debt, white goods, all the areas we would expect. When we talk to recipients, if we move on to the next slide, it was very rare that there was one cause. The causes of crisis were numerous, and talking to recipients and from our survey and from the interviews, going into depth to discuss with them the journey to crisis, nearly every single person we talked to had numerous drivers of crisis. But income insufficiency, you could see it's a long line here. And that's exactly what we were mentioning. It's a very, very challenging time at the moment for the residents with the lowest income. Thanks. I'll move on to the next one. I've got some illustrations of the complexity of crisis and how hard it is to say that that is one particular crisis that we could find another way of finding support for. This interviewee had had a serious accident, so we've got an accident. It led to long-term disability. She'd previously been in employment as a nurse. she just didn't have enough savings to manage this accident and the disability following it. Not knowing the benefit system, delays in benefits, serious delays with her disability benefits claim. So during that period, she built up horrendous debt, ongoing debt repayment, meaning she never had enough to live on each month. But actually, when she presented to the council, it was for white goods replacement. So that engagement with the council around the white goods allowed them to uncover everything else and support other issues that this person was facing. Another example, if we move on to the next slide, somebody who had been managing, they'd worked as a solicitor for over 30 years, COVID hit, depression, health problems, mental health problems. She had large outgoings because she'd always been able to manage with her outgoings, had no idea about the benefit system, no idea where to go for support. Once her redundancy pay ran out, she was trying to survive on nothing. She had bedroom. Once the universal credit came through, she thought that'd be enough to cover costs, but she was hit by the bedroom tax. So she just needed some money. Her money ran out before the end of the month. She needed money for food. Now, I think if we look at this case, it does show that these crises can hit anybody. People can be hit by crisis, even from the most stable positions, but it's complex. It's always complex. So engagement around local welfare assistance allows councils to support people in numerous ways. We move on to the next one. Local welfare assistance was really valued by the recipients, and we heard this again and again. There was huge gratitude for the service and enormous praise for the staff they met, and to feel exactly as Councillor Holland said initially, found somebody was there, somebody on their side. They weren't facing this crisis alone. There is nowhere else to turn. Typically, these people had nowhere else to turn. They were appreciative of both the financial support and just the support from somebody who was listening to their problems and signposting them in the right direction to get them back on their feet. And although the financial support of local welfare assistance was relatively low, the average we found was £146. It made a considerable difference. It just got somebody over a period where they could not afford food or they could not afford heating. Huge differences from small amounts of money. Next slide, please. There was one tangible finding that we probably didn't expect to find, was it did have an impact on rent arrears. We think it was all the local welfare assistance recipients had higher rent arrears on average and higher council tax arrears than the general population on benefits within boroughs. We would expect this. These were people who didn't have a single, no money left, so arrears had built up. So we would have expected them to have an initial starting point of higher arrears. But what we found over the period of the study was the people who got local welfare assistance, their rent arrears reduced, whereas across the whole low-income cohort, arrears increased slightly. It's very interesting, and we feel this is because a lot of people who had rent arrears, this is council tenants, because they're the only rent arrears data we had, was because they're housing officers. They were in touch with the council anyway, so they heard about local welfare assistance. And these people, their crisis was being noticed by housing officers who were putting them forward for support. So a really interesting finding, obviously has implications for homelessness, rent arrears, and the stability of tenancies and sustainability of tenancies. Next slide, please. Another finding that, and we tried to ascertain what people would have done if they hadn't received local welfare assistance. This is a really difficult, it's almost like a negative finding, because although we can say local welfare assistance had this impact on your rent, it had this impact on mental health, to actually say what did it prevent is a harder finding and a harder one to actually evidence. So we asked all the interviewees what you would have done. We asked our survey recipients as well, what would you have done if you hadn't received this? And actually, every single response was harmful, would have been harmful to the long-term health, financial mental health of the households. 28% would have relied on loans from families or friends. There's been some very interesting work from some other organisations. I bring up particularly JRF here, that family and friends loans can often end up being problematic on their own. And also people run out of support from family and friends. It's not a long-term solution. 34% would have lived without essential household goods. And by that, we also mean food. 37% would have left bills unpaid. Leaving bills unpaid is not just a matter of putting things off time-wise. You often end up with court costs, additional costs on top of the bills plus interest. So what you're doing is you're making a situation of poverty even worse. And 9%, which is quite worrying, would have taken out a loan with a commercial loan company or doorstep lender, which meant financially their ongoing situation would have been a lot worse, because they would have been using their ongoing means-tested benefits to pay back high interest on loans. One of the, as I mentioned earlier, the complexity of crisis meant that the engagement around local welfare assistance allowed councils to engage with people who are really at a really low point financially. And all the councils had an aim to offer holistic support, do a benefit maximisation check. There's an awful lot of unclaimed benefits. There's an awful lot of people who could be getting other support. And all the councils had an aim to do those checks, but there were resource implications in that. And 37% of the recipients of local welfare assistance actually received additional support. And this was very much appreciated. 73% said it was really helpful. So that additional support, that's a holistic view of the person's situation to try and aim for long-term stability and not have repeat applications, was really valued by the recipients. And really, if you don't have something like local welfare assistance, there is you don't have that channel for people to engage on these issues. On the graph there, you can see some of the areas at local welfare that councils help people with who are applying for local welfare. Budgeting, improved budgeting, the mental well-being, going back to what Councillor Holland said at the beginning about just feeling somebody's there to support you. But there's improved household income, which is the first one. So you haven't got a whole text in there. But 17% of people saw an improvement in their household income. Now, the importance of that, of course, is it prevents additional crises in the future. Thanks very much. Next slide, please. So the recommendations, the report has, as I mentioned, numerous very practical recommendations. I just want to pull out a few of them, and hopefully that'll give you an appetite to have a look at the others. But if we can move on to them. The first one is exactly what Councillor Holland mentioned, long-term dedicated funding. We found that the amount that the 7 boroughs were putting aside for local welfare assistance was not related to poverty in the borough. There was no correlation at all. And that's not to put down what these councils were doing. You know, there's so many other pressures on councils. There's so much resource pressure. They were putting as much into local welfare assistance as they possibly could. But this, you know, the need for local welfare assistance will be related to poverty, and perhaps some dedicated funding would get over that problem. So pulling out some of the recommendations, the two of the ones here I think are key. Councils could use their data to target support at points of crisis. There were quite often, and we saw duplication of the points of crisis of areas where councils could have picked up crisis earlier. And you could either target support or just target information about support at those points. There seemed to be a bit of an ad hoc channel to how people understood that local welfare assistance existed. So targeting support at points of crisis means that the people who need it will at least know it's there. There is actually a safety net. And some of the points of crisis we've got here in this list. There are more in the report. As arrears increase, one missed payment could trigger information going to those households to say these are the areas where you could get support. You could apply for local welfare assistance. Moving out of temporary accommodation, now this is a big one. As people moved out of temporary accommodation into permanent housing, they often move with just a very small bag. They've got no goods, no furniture, no carpeting, and they don't have the means to furnish a house. That's an obvious trigger that doesn't necessarily need to rely on somebody making a proactive approach to the council. A housing benefits stop notice when people move off housing benefits and are obviously moving across to universal credit. That's often a point of crisis. Somebody has to wait a month. Now, there are the interim payments of the government has introduced, which have been a real help, but that's definitely a point of crisis. And it'd be very useful at that point when the stop notice is received by the council that they let people know alternative support mechanisms. And councils also have data that they receive for their benefit recipients on income and they can use measures of outgoing. So councils themselves can use data analysis to work out which households have income which is below the basic needs to live on. In other words, they can find that the residents within their borough that don't have enough income to pay bills. The second overarching finding was that it'd be really useful if all local welfare assistant applicants could have additional holistic support. Particularly benefit health checks. Some of the councils that took part in the survey provide really comprehensive support packs to people who approach the council in crisis, signposting not only additional sources of support, but also where cheap foodstuffs can be brought, where secondhand shops are. All sorts of things that just may be useful to people on low income. And the people who received those packs were incredibly grateful for them because they put them aside. They could keep going back to them. Thank you. Next slide. Some specific recommendations on this slide around service delivery. And as we mentioned earlier, these apply as much to household support fund as local welfare assistance. Firstly, a choice of communication and application channels. Really important because people who are just applying for something like a replacement white good, an online form is a perfect way to do that. But someone who's had multiple drivers of crisis, they actually need support with benefit applications. They need to understand the benefit system more. They've also got some housing issues. They would like to write all that down and they would like to talk to somebody. It's so complex. They would like to talk to somebody and somebody hear them. Very interestingly, nearly all the recipients we spoke to said they did not want a meeting. They wanted either telephone or writing, and that was because of feelings of shame. A lot of them said they would not, if it'd been a face-to-face interview, they may not have gone because of the feeling of shame of asking for help. Ensuring that application process do not create barriers for specific groups. An example I'd give you here is only having application channels open during working hours for people on low. A lot of the applicants were actually working a few hours a week or even working longer than that, but they couldn't get time off work to apply. They would have had to have actually taken an afternoon or a day off, which would have a cost implication for them in order to apply because the channels are only open during working hours. So there were also language barriers for some people. So it's just ensuring, and this is really doesn't put the council to any more cost, but just ensuring that there aren't barriers to application, and ensuring that the application process doesn't require additional cost. Things that we take for granted, if you're not in this situation, like being able to use a phone, and the amount of time you're waiting on hold doesn't matter. It does matter to people who are in poverty, and just ensuring that there isn't a cost implication of actually putting in an application. The second set of recommendations here is around the delivery mechanism. Firstly, choice around allowing councils to have choice, councils, recipients to have choice about how they spend the support. Cash is preferred by everybody. And I think one of the big findings was, in fact, it's the most cost effective. People in poverty tend to know best where they can buy cheap goods. They know how to shop around. They know how to make the most of that money. It also allows people, when people are in this sort of level of crisis, they don't usually have just one need. They need to put some money in the fuel meter at the same time as buy food. So the two go together, and having cash allows them to do that. Very interestingly, we got the feeling from the people we interviewed that choice is a luxury. It's a luxury, and they just felt overwhelmed when they felt they were given this choice, and they made much better use of it. There was also councils should look at any barriers to accessing support, which were inadvertently. These are councils who had local welfare schemes, really wanted to help their residents, but there were inadvertent barriers in accessing the support that had actually been granted to them. It says PayPal codes here, that's PayPoint codes. Using sort of code, these are codes that you take to a shop that's got a PayPoint sign, and they'll convert them into cash. Unfortunately, a lot of the shops that have that sign won't convert into cash. And one of our interviewees had been driving around for 5 hours trying to find somewhere that would give her the cash that had been awarded by her council to her. And she had the code, but none of the shops that had a PayPoint sign would actually do that conversion. She did not have the petrol to be driving around, and she was about to give up when she found somewhere that would do that conversion for her. Barriers, setting specific shops where a voucher has to be spent does cause barriers to people, because it may be right over the other side of the borough. It might involve the cost of a bus fare, or getting a lift with somebody. Somebody needed to wait until they had their carer came in one day a week who could take them on that long journey to that specific shop. Whereas if they had cash to spend wherever they wanted, they could have perhaps managed it themselves. Disability, this is a big barrier. If somebody's got has disabilities, they might not be able to go into specific shops. They might not be able to use that voucher as quickly as until the voucher runs out, because they may need to rely on support in using that voucher. We found cases of where people have been given vouchers to support them, but they ran out before they could actually get the support they needed to access the shops. And another one here is quotes for work or goods. It was just impossible for people to meet. Somebody had had their windows broken. Finding 3 quotes to get those windows replaced just meant they did not take up that support, because they couldn't get the necessary quotes to actually realise the support that had been offered to them. Thanks. Next slide. And this is my final slide. This is the final recommendations, that council should work with other councils to implement a common evaluation framework. This was really important to us. It was actually really hard to evaluate local welfare assistance, because every council held their data on local welfare assistance. They held different data, they held it in different formats. And it meant that it was really, really hard to pull out good practice across councils and to do comparisons across councils, because there wasn't a common format. So yeah, actually a common format is needed. One of the things that we would say that isn't just for evaluation long term, but is for internal council usage, is a linking reference. When people come for local welfare assistance to a council, there is often not a reference that can be linked to rent arrears, to benefit support, to anything else. So the holistic support to that view of that resident cannot be seen across the council. And that's just a simple fix. The data sets need to be holding some sort of linking reference, so you can actually internally even evidence the impact on rent arrears. So to take these forward, finding these recommendations forward, and this specific recommendation forward, London Councils has put out a call to any interested boroughs to take forward this work on creating a common evaluation framework. And the report actually lists the areas that would be useful for councils to hold on their local welfare assistance scheme. I'll leave it there, and Sam might talk about that a bit later. Thank you, Councillor Holland.
Well, thank you very much, Zoe. That was a really interesting and comprehensive and incredibly useful overview of the report's findings and recommendations. So thank you very much for that. And I know you've got a cold and a cough, so it's a very valiant effort. Thank you for turning up and sharing that with us today. Um, I'm going to open it up to questions now. The first one I can answer, which is from Councillor Mariana Masters from the amazing London Borough of Lambeth. Yes, Mariana, we are going to be sharing the presentation afterwards, and also there'll be a link to the full report that you can read in your. So thank you for asking that. What I suggest that I do is, if I have a question from Councillor Ruth McGregor, please do put your questions in the chat. Just type them in. It's the Q&A icon at the top of your screen where all the icons are. It's not the normal chat function. And I'll put the questions. What I suggest, if this is okay with you, Ruth, I'll put your question to Zoe. And if Zoe and possibly Sam want to come in and answer it. And then if you want to come back on it, if you could raise your hands, I'll look out for you raising your hand if there was something that you wanted to add to it. Councillor Ruth McGregor's question is it possible to share an example of a council which has good processes in place, e.g. making cash payments, and would they be willing to share their knowledge? So I don't know if this came out in your work with the 7 councils that you were working with, Zoe, or even outside of that work.
It's interesting, actually, and we found the good practice that we brought out and the examples we've given throughout the report come from every single council that took part. There was not one council that actually follows every single one of the recommendations. We found good work in all 7 of them. It's really joining all those together. I would say that Greenwich in particular stands out for the holistic work, the holistic support given to residents, and the gratitude of residents towards the officers at Greenwich. That did shine through on this. But you see, Greenwich didn't have all the recommendations. So there's not one council I could say did all of this, but Greenwich does have the support pack, and it definitely did the holistic support, which I think was two of the major recommendations. But in fact, any of the councils that took part are listed, and every single one of them had elements of good practice and would be worth contacting.
Great, thank you, Zoe. I believe that Councillor McGregor does wish to come back on that, and I don't know if we can unmute her, please, so she can speak. Councillor, do you want to say where you're from, so that we all know as well? Thank you, and thanks for your question. I think you can speak now.
Thank you. Sorry, I was going to switch my camera on, but I can't see where it is now. I'm from Bromley Council. I know that we only make payments in the form of food vouchers, and we, as Labour councillors, we've challenged that. And there's often a discussion around fraud and that it could lead to fraud. So I think it would be helpful in particular, I suppose, to speak to somebody at a council that does make the cash payments, find out what their experience has been of it. But are there contacts in the report who we could speak to at Greenwich, for example? Because I think all of the good examples would be helpful for us, really.
Hi.
Thank you, Ruth.
Yeah, sorry, I spoke over you there. Yeah, in the report, there's a table that shows which councils that took part offer cash, and which do other mechanisms, and you'll find that useful because it will you can get in contact with the councils that offer cash. I'm quite happy. I can put you in contact if Councillor Holland gives me your details afterwards. I'll put you in contact with the people we worked with from the councils that provide cash, just so that they can. I haven't covered any issues around fraud within this report. They will have probably done some internal work, almost certainly. So you might, it'd be you would have to follow up with those councils on that.
Thank you very
Thank
much,
you.
Zoe. And thank you, Ruth, for that question. And yeah, I think that is something that when we go out and about and talk to residents when we're on the doorstep as councillors, that is probably something that residents will raise. Well, how do you know they're spending it on what they've applied to spend it on? So I think that would be really interesting to get responses on that about that ability to be able to give cash and mitigate the circumstances in which fraud can be applied. For example, multiplicity of applications, etc., without being I guess, too dictatorial and invading someone's privacy. So I'm sorry, I'm just seeing if I'm switching between participants and Q&A here. We have another question. Oh, and it's again from another wonderful councillor from the London Borough of Lambeth, and that's Councillor Christine Banton. And again, Christine, what I'll do is I'll put your question, and then if you want to come back on it, if you want to raise your hand, that would be great. And Christine's asking, is this support pack offered by housing associations, Zoe?
No, the support packs we were talking about were ones that are offered by the councils. I'm fairly certain there will be housing associations out there that do something similar, but we were concentrating on the work of councils. So these were councils who had ready-made packs that they gave to anybody that they thought was may face crisis or in crisis, and they were very, very valued.
Great. I mean, a lot of us we know as councillors do work with our local housing association. So I think that's a really interesting point that Christine makes also about us using our sort of civic and political leadership functions as councils to be able to use those levers to reach out and share good practice with each other, with our housing association partners who we're already in many partnerships with, so that we can do that exchange of information and networking and best practice. Because also I was very interested when you were saying in the your presentation about how encouraging councils to use data smartly, or maybe more smartly than we're already doing. And I think we learned a lot in COVID, and we're learning a lot now through the cost of living crisis about how we can identify individuals who may need help, who may not otherwise come forward. And that maybe that's something we should be exploring more, not just within our own council, but across councils and with partners such as housing associations.
Yeah, and we work and we do a lot of work, but we know that councils are doing much more of this, and some of the lack of joining up around data is inadvertent. One department's designed a local welfare assistance scheme, and benefits data's coming in here. There's no way of linking them, but we know that councils are really concentrated on this use of data now and reaching and trying to be proactive in identifying residents. And a lot of this has come from the Household Support Fund. It's really useful if you can actually identify the people who need the money from the Household Support Fund. And the DWP is sharing more data now with local authorities to allow them to do this. And actually, some councils are doing absolutely incredible work in bringing all their data sets together so that they can identify the most vulnerable residents within their boroughs.
So, and you mentioned, Christine, I'm assuming you didn't want to come back on that because you didn't raise your hand, but please do raise your hand and we can unmute you if you wish to. Um, oh, and before I go on, there's another question, if you bear with me. The question This, no, I'm going the wrong way. This question is from Councillor Mary Mason, Zoe, because I can't see that Christine is asking to come back on that, but it's certainly something that we can all take away and continue those conversations with our partners within our own areas. This is from Councillor Mary Mason, and Mary wants to know how far were councils developing support alongside the voluntary sector, for example, food banks and other holistic support?
Yeah, and we saw some really good examples of councils working with other organisations, third-party organisations within their boroughs. Most councils, their local welfare assistance was a partnership. It was a partnership with other organisations. So for councils that, for example, who gave out cash for food or emergencies like that, they also might have done white goods in partnership with another furniture with a furniture warehouse. So local welfare assistance for councils tended to be the this holistic thing. There was part of it they would administer, quite a lot would be administered by partners within the voluntary sector. So I think it's a great question, because I actually think that's the way forward. You know, councils have limited resources. If they do the bits that nobody else can do, and they have partnership for where the voluntary sector can support as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think our reflection as local authorities up and down the country from COVID, and which that we're building the strength upon that strength now, was that partnership and practice, and the way we were able to get food to people, the way we were able to get other services to people, keep businesses on their feet, etc., was absolutely to do with our close relationships and networks of partners, which strengthened during COVID and which now we are building on again and able to use during the current cost of living crisis. Absolutely. So, Mary, thank you for the question. If you want to come back, let me know. Christine does want to come back. Christine asked the previous question around housing associations. Christine, do you want to come in and make your point? You've been on mute. It's Chris. Yeah, you've been
Yes.
unmuted now, Christine.
Can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
Yeah. Because I know as counsellors, we have lots of casework with people who are, you know, in debt all round, and then you know, they're obviously they pay us council tax. So is there a way that we can offer them some kind of support, although they might not be a Lambeth tenant, their housing association, but they pay us council tax? So how can they get any part of this package?
So they're paying council tax to one council, but they live in another. Is these temporary housing people?
No, they are housing association tenants. However, the council tax would be paid to Lambeth.
Right.
It's just that they're housed by a housing association rather than Lambeth.
I think it's council. I think it's really important to have a view on council tax support. Really, really important, and to get it to people as soon as possible. It's a really good question, because actually we found a lot of the local welfare system recipients, a lot of people had fallen into crisis. A lot of it was around council tax. It was one of those particularly when people moved over to universal credit, they just did not know to apply for council tax, and the sooner that councils can identify people who could get council tax reduction, get support with their council tax, any work on that is going to reduce council tax arrears, reduce poverty, reduce the build-up. I mean, the council tax arrears, you then get into court costs, additional costs for people who haven't got any money in the first place. So I think in terms of what councils can do about that, yes, identify people, use your data, identify people who are coming off legacy benefits, waiting for a move to universal credit, and ensure that they apply for council tax reduction. If they don't apply within a month, contact them, make sure they apply for council tax reduction.
And that comes to your point about us using data more smartly and identifying people when we think that could be a trigger, telling us it's a red flag that they might be in need. Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Christine. I hope that answered your question. Thank you for putting that.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Christine. We now have a question from Councillor Mariana Masters, which I know is a subject very close to Mariana's heart, who's been working with refugee families in Lambeth around this issue. And Mariana's question is this. There is a growing problem of children going to school in dirty clothes, and teachers have said that they suspect the cost of living crisis means low-income families are cutting back on using washing machines. Are there any councils coming up with creative solutions to help?
And from the report, there's not a lot I could say on that, except I think the schools issue is really interesting because a number of the recipients we talked to, that's the only way they heard about local welfare assistance. So councils, I mean, it goes back to your the earlier conversation about working with the voluntary sector. It's working in partnership. It's getting the message out all across the borough that this help is available. And the councils who are represented here, who have local welfare assistance, schools are huge partnerships. Schools are where you need to go and make sure that the teachers, make sure support workers at that school know that local welfare assistance exists. Because otherwise people sort of stumble across it. A friend mentions it or something. And I don't think it is just the voluntary sector that the councils can work with. I think from the interviews we had with the recipients, schools are crucial in this because they're often the organisations that sees the first signs of crisis.
Absolutely, and we know that from safeguarding as well, how vital schools are for us. So Mariana, I don't know whether you wanted to come back on that at all. I'm just trying to see if you've got your hand raised. If you want to raise your hand to indicate if you did want to come back on that at all. Yes, Mariana does. Are we able to unmute Mariana? Is she unmuted? She tries, no, she's not unmuted. Yeah, you are now.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I just wanted, I mean, I think it's just the beginnings of a problem that we'll probably hear a bit more about, because families, although I've done a lot of work with refugee families, I'm talking in general about our social housing tenants who, and we know that there's issues with damp as well, where they're not putting heating on and they're not ventilating flats, and then also spoken to teachers. My daughter's a teacher, so she's also told me how children are coming to school on a Monday with dirty clothes. And some schools I've heard of outside of Lambeth have actually gone to the extent of having washing machines in the school, where they've offered to at times and they've got they've also had school uniform in the school, where they've picked out a child and taken their clothes, put them in new clothes and then washed theirs, so that at the end of the day they could go back home with clean uniform. So just wondering whether we've begun to notice, any other boroughs have noticed that, and if it is sort of going to become more of a problem, whether there are any other creative solutions. So I don't know whether people would go to laundrettes and whether they could have discounts at using the laundrette, or things like that we could consider.
Councillor Holland, I obviously can't talk for other councils, but in terms of, is this going to be a continuing problem? You may be interested just in response to that, is that any work to help families in poverty at the moment, anything you do with schools, any work out there the problem is going to increase. We've been, Alex, actually, my colleague who's on this call, did a very, very interesting bit of data analysis to look. Next year, there will be more families who cannot meet basic bills. It does get better beyond that, but if you look into the future, there's at least the cost of living crisis means that this isn't going to necessarily be over quickly. And that's all I can say to that. So yes, your comment, is this going to be an increasing problem? Our analysis, and that's not from this report, sorry, that's from previous work Policy and Practice has done, our analysis is that yes, it is likely to be.
And also, I think Mariana's call out was for any colleagues on the calls from different boroughs who are coming up with creative solutions around this that would be of practical help and support to other boroughs. Please do share. And I think that would go for any practices that we're all introducing, how we're innovating to try and support our residents even more than we are already. And as we said, to work more smartly, please share. And we've only got a couple of minutes left. So what I was going to do, and I can't see that anyone else has got any more questions. Thank you for that, Mariana, was to see if you had any closing comments you wanted to make, Zoe. And then I was going to go to Sam, who's our policy lead on this at London Councils, for him maybe to have closing remarks, because as I said at the beginning, we wanted this, and really thank you for your input, everybody, in the questions, to be really practical meetings, so that, because we know that we're out there doing the job of trying to help our residents, so we need practical solutions and we want to share ideas. So Zoe, before I hand over to Sam, was there anything else you wanted to finish on?
Just very, very quickly, the practical recommendations around delivery and delivery mechanisms in the report are worth looking at if you want to make sure you're making the most of your resources you're putting into local welfare assistance. The second, I'd just like to be the channel for the people I interviewed personally to say thanks so much to all the councils that are doing this. The work you're doing is making a huge difference and is really, really appreciated. They're not here to say it, so I'd just like to pass that on.
Thank you very much, Zoe. I'll just turn to Sam before I then close the meeting.
Well, thank you very much for Zoe for such a great presentation, and Councillor Holland for fantastic chairing, and all of you for giving up your lunch break to listen to these interesting recommendations. I just wanted to finish by saying, I think, as Zoe mentioned, that we're very keen that this doesn't just become a policy report that sits on the digital shelf and doesn't do anything. We really want to work with boroughs who are interested in taking these recommendations forward. And I think that we've learned before that kind of learning is best done in a group, so that councils can learn from each other as to how they take forward the recommendations. So we'll be forming a working group to look at the recommendations from the report, look at the evaluation framework. We've already put a call out via the London Welfare Network, which London Councils chairs as an officer network. But if you're interested in involving your borough and taking forward some of these recommendations, I'll make sure that my contact details are shared when we send out the slides and the report, and you can contact me and suggest that your borough joins that working group. I'll finish up there.
Thank you very much, Sam, and thank you for all your work on this, leading on this at London Councils. So it just leaves me to thank everybody for coming. Thank you for all those really fascinating questions, interesting input. If you're not your cost of living lead in your borough, please speak to your cost of living lead, and please contact Sam to get involved. And I really want to thank Zoe and her colleagues for working in partnership with London Councils when in doing such essential and cutting edge work that is sadly so necessary to support our communities at the moment. And we really appreciate that. And the report is so invaluable to us. And I feel really, really motivated for in my borough, but also to spread the word across London for us to take this back and to use it as a real practical toolkit for us to be able to really improve the services and that we're providing to our residents, share best practice. If you have any questions, please get in contact. As I said, the PowerPoint and Sam's details will be circulated with how to everybody afterwards with how to access the full report. Thank you for your time today, and I look forward to continuing to work with all of you, and good luck in your respective boroughs across London. Good afternoon. Thank you.